And here we are. Welcome back to the Richard Sophomore, where we never shut out. We're your hosts, MD and CD. Today, look, marks the final day of SEC Media Days. All right. So we're gonna pull some quotes, we're gonna talk about some highlights, and we're basically just gonna kind of give you a little bit of a rundown if you didn't have a chance to check that out. If you like this kind of content, make sure you liked the video and also subscribe. If you like the video, like the content. It's a pretty simple rule that we have here. We just ask you to do that to help us out. Right? If you're listening on Spotify, what you can do is give us a 5-star rating and follow us over there on Spotify if you want to keep getting updated. So we're gonna have videos like this for ACC as well as Big Ten Media Days as well, which are coming up next week. Uh, and then also we got conference previews coming up that are going to start absolutely being pumped out. I mean, literally right after this, we're going to record one. So it's going to be, I mean, those things are monsters. So make sure you all are stay in tune for those guys because I can't wait because football is here, man. I'm hearing these coaches talk about these players, hearing coaches talk about, having to go into other environments. Conference realignment has been crazy. So hearing some of these new coaches at their first time at SEC Media Days, whether or not they were uh, previously at the school or not, it's interesting. It's very interesting these days.
Yeah, no, I'm excited. I mean, we're inching closer and closer. Media days is fun, always to react and see what's going on. It's cool to get these coaches in a different, limelight. They're a little bit more relaxed in July than they are come, September through January, especially in the SEC there.
Absolutely. So I want to start by talking a little bit about Greg Sankey, commissioner, and what he had been talking about for SEC Media Days. He was asked a bunch of questions, but I just want to highlight a couple things. Of course, he had been asked if he's been monitoring, right, what has been going on with Florida State and Clemson with the potential realignment situation over there in the Big 12 and other schools as well. Um, but basically, to put it bluntly, he said, we're focused on R16, right, which is, what he should be doing. Like, there's no reason to expand um the situation right now with the SEC. I believe that's why Florida State and Clemson, are outside searching for other conferences. I think Florida State and Clemson would be good cultural adds to the SEC. Absolutely. I just don't think it's going to happen for those particular schools. Now, if Florida State and Clemson were to go to the Big 12 and all of a sudden the SEC was like, oh, sure, we'll add NC State and North Carolina, I wouldn't be all that upset, to be honest. I think those would be pretty good cultural fits, I think, in the SEC. But right now, it looks like we're staying at 16 in the SEC.
Yeah, I think if I selfishly, that's kind of what I want to see for the betterment of the sport.
Correct.
I mean, we're looking more and more towards a power three in college football nowadays. And at least if you're throwing Florida State and Clemson to the SEC, the Big Ten is going to respond, if I had to assume, and take a couple guys from the ACC, and that leaves the crumbs left over for the Big 12. And to be honest, that just further divides, the talent and the programs within college football and the conferences. And I think if Florida State and Clemson find their way over the Big 12, definitely bolster that conference at the top end, especially. And yeah, like I said, I also think Florida and South Carolina would not be too happy adding two of their most bitter rivals as well. Although Texas A&M didn't really have much of a say when Texas joined, but I do think some of that is recency where Texas A&M is relatively new to the conference, compared to that of Florida and South Carolina.
Absolutely. And we'll get to Mike Elko's thoughts on some of that as well. But I do want to mention also new thing going on, right? Technology wise, Greg Sankey commented, of course, on helmet communication devices. And he did say an interesting point. He talked about, a lot of teams um, running the hurry up offense in college, and you don't really see that a lot in the NFL. So certainly an adjustment. But there were other coaches like Jeff Levy, specifically, a guy who runs at a pretty high tempo, who was asked, if he thought that it would have impacted a lot, and he said he didn't think so. So glad to hear that the hurry up offense is here to stay in college football. The fast
Well,
pace.
absolutely, and I'll add to that too. I think it's almost an advantage to be hurry up. If you get to the line, you get set. you have a chance to communicate with your quarterback staring at, all 22 vision of the field. If you're up in the booth there as an offensive coordinator, talking to your quarterback, you can tell him, hey, you seeing this here? You seeing this backside corner? Look at this nickel creeping. He's a little out of alignment. Look at the safety all the way, not far enough over to the hash. And then you could really take advantage of some plays. And likewise, it goes the other way as well, where defense coordinators get a chance to see what the offense is looking like lined up right away. And maybe you can funnel one last call, maybe a last blitz or, a rip or a Liz on your defensive line based on the formation and what their alignments are telling you on the offense side. So I think it's awesome. I think it's even more chess play, even more coaching. It's pretty exciting what they can do.
Yeah, and then some sponsorship announcements announcing Apple as a partnership. They're putting using iPads on the sideline instead of the NFL surfaces that they're using.
Ah,
So I guess it's pretty cool. But and then another corporate sponsor they announced was Sonic, which is awesome. But then one piece of news that also was kind of shed to light by Greg Sankey, not via like when he was on the podium, but off to the side talking to I believe Yahoo Sports, Ross Dellinger, um, talked about having to pay players and what that could mean with sharing the revenue with some of these players, and that the player pool might be, up to $15 million uh, uh, per team. I don't know if it's per team, what that number was, but then he also talked about its implication on other sports and how baseball, uh, they're gonna basically make the roster size about 30 some and then add about 20 scholarships. So baseball players are gonna be able to pay or have scholarships for their entire team, which I think is really cool because some of those out of state kids paying like 40 grand, and they're good players. Like if you're playing baseball for Tennessee, if you're playing baseball for Alabama or Texas A&M or Vanderbilt, like you should not have to pay. I mean, you shouldn't have to pay for your tuition, which previously was the case for a lot of these kids. So yeah, I thought that was pretty cool. Not that that's a direct impact in college football, but I do think you are going to see roster limits in college football. That's where that kind of leaks into, where there's just maybe less players. We'll see if walk-ons continue to be a thing in the next couple of years. So that is something that could, kind of leak its way into college football.
yeah, I think the walk or the number I'm hearing thrown out is 105. Now I don't know if there's much substance to it. We haven't seen anything in official writing yet, so it's obviously subject to change, just like everything is in college football, right? Everything's up for grabs. So who knows on that front? But I do think you mentioned the walk on, and that's always a fun thing. I think a little bit less so in the SEC, just because the talent that you're bringing in on the front end of your classes is super, super significant. But you look at the Big 12 and the bottom half of the Big 10, walk-ons, especially in-state guys, it's a really big deal for these fan bases. They get to kind of rally around a guy, maybe an in-state hometown kid that they grew up watching. They can see him, on the sidelines for their team, and eventually sometimes make some special teams plays. And obviously Kyle Field, I'm sorry, the 12th man for Texas A&M is a big deal there culturally as well. I know you know all about that. But yeah, I think the walk on to me, as much as I would love all these kids to get the tuition paid for, but I do know that they're doing some fun things with NIL and maybe paying some guys some PWOs just to add depth to their roster. To pay it, especially if they're paying in state and it's not too much. But I do hope that their roster size can stay high enough to where enough players can fulfill their dream of playing college football, whether it be on scholarship, but also the chance to walk on as well.
Absolutely. I'm going to move on to some coaching quotes. And, a big storyline obviously was Texas moving to the SEC in the offseason, but also Oklahoma, because there's several coaches that have connections to the University of Oklahoma. One of them being Shane Beamer, who was at OSU. And of course, he was asked, what do you remember from your time at OSU? What's your quarterback situation? Yada, yada, yada. But one question that he's asked in particular that I thought was really interesting was, hey, Coach Beamer, what is the biggest adjustment for Oklahoma into the SEC? And Shane Beamer says the size and the depth of the trenches in the SEC. In the Big 12, maybe one or two of players you have to be cognitive of on the line of scrimmage. In the SEC, there's 6 or 7. I mean,
Wow.
is how much truth is there to that?
We're doing our Big 12 previews right now. Spoiler if you Matthew teased that earlier. We can record some more, and there's not a ton of quality depth in that conference, at least in 2024. I know it's a small sample size, but even going back off the top of your head, there's been some really good players like Shane Bieber mentioned, maybe one or two, three guys per team. But yeah, the depth week in and week out is, I will say, that's where you're seeing, to me, the most big jump. And I absolutely agree with Beamer. And also, I wonder if he's not taking a shot, but I know he knows, much has been said of Oklahoma and their offensive line, especially their losses as they move into the SEC and how they're going to replace all those guys. And I know they got a bunch of transfers and they'll see what happens, but those guys are going to have to block. And week in and week out in the SEC, we'll see how it comes out.
Yeah, and I do think with the 12-team expanded playoffs, right? And we've talked about this before a little bit, the Big 12, I wouldn't say has a team that can directly compete for a national championship this year, right? But they have an opportunity to get into the playoffs, which is important to those teams, right? But by expanding to the 12-team playoff, like you are giving teams in the SEC, in the Big Ten, with significant more depth, right? If you're gonna ask, like, hey, like which teams, which conferences are more equipped to play 16 or 17 game seasons, it's going to be the SEC and the Big Ten, right? So, Shane Beamer commenting on that, I thought was very interesting. And, I agree with them to an extent. There's some high level talent in the Big 12, like some of the top end talent at particular positions. I would stack them up against a lot of the other conferences in the country. But the depth on the line of scrimmage, there are a couple of schools in there with some really solid, really deep defensive lines. You think about UCF underratedly. I, I'm just I think he's right. And there's some defensive lines in the SEC that are not like that. Obviously Vanderbilt comes to mind, but South Carolina, who's going to be scraping by to make a bowl game this year, has incredible depth on the defensive line. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's teams like that you're like, there's just a lot of depth all over the SEC and the defensive line and in the Big Ten as well at the defensive line position. So, which is certainly uh, some of the most important spots to have depth in college football. I do want to talk about Kirby Smart real quick. And he kind of was asked about like what does it mean to be a head coach in college football now that he's been doing this for this is I believe his ninth year as the head coach at Georgia or his ninth SEC Media Day. And the quote that he shared was, and he mentioned that it referenced Indiana Jones, and how he said it, and I believe it was Raiders of the Lost Ark. He says it's not the years, it's the mileage, right? So even though Kirby's only been there for 9 years and he's in his 40s, and he's arguably more accomplished than Saban at this point, like there's a lot of mileage. Look, and obviously Kirby
Yeah.
Smart isn't retiring anytime soon, but in college football this year, there are 31 brand new head coaches in college football. That is 23% of all teams in college football have a brand new head coach. That's ridiculous. Expectations are sky high. The schedule year round is a gauntlet. The NFL is looking nicer and nicer. Even a couple head coaches took coordinator jobs. Kane Womack went to Alabama, took a coordinator job. Maurice Linguist took a coordinator job. Jeff Hafley took an offensive analyst job at Green Bay, I believe. I believe he's a analyst there. Is he, or is he a coordinator, position coach, maybe? Whatever it is. Um, yeah, Jim Harbaugh went to the NFL. Like that,
Sean Elliott. Sean Elliott just dipped out of Georgia
Sean
State.
Elliott dipped out of Georgia State. He's over at South Carolina coaching. Was it special teams or tight ends or something? So it is a problem. And Kirby didn't share on how to fix that particular problem. That would have been a follow-up question that I, you know, would have loved to hear the answer to, but I think the answer is the same, fix the calendar, right?
Yeah. Well, and fix also, like, they're doing a little bit with the transfer portal, but the stress that you have like every day, and maybe Kirby Smart doesn't deal with it quite to the extent as maybe a guy like Shane Beamer does, where you could just have a guy plucked off your roster whenever you want, or whenever they want and whatnot, in the kind of stress that revolves around, building relationships 365 days a year and making sure that you're not worried about guys leaving. You don't have sleepless nights about, well, what happens if this position and gets weak. What are we gonna do here? And then it's also a ripple effect too. If you have a top program has a guy taken from them, they're gonna go down a rung in the ladder, and they're gonna pluck somebody, and it's gonna go down even more. They're gonna pluck somebody, and then it's just gonna keep going down and down and down. And yeah, it's pretty tough right now. I don't know what the solution is. I don't know how quick it's gonna happen. And I don't know if we're going to lose any good coaches. I think that's been a talking point in college football for a while now. You've heard Josh Pate talk about it a bunch, where it's like,
Or Nick
not to name
Saban talk
names, but
about it.
yeah, there are, you know, rumors, and just I don't think it would surprise me to see. Look at Kyle Whittingham. Like, he's older, yes, obviously, but he's also kind of changed his tune about coaching, and how hard it is now compared to when he started. And even guys that are saying it's not about football anymore. It's about recruiting and paying players and blah blah blah, whatever it may be.
Yeah, low key, the even though some things about it are good and some things about it are bad. I mean, the college basketball schedule is honestly the best schedule that we have. Because college baseball schedule is terrible because, uh, right in the midst of the transfer portal, right, you have the MLB draft, so you hardly give kids an opportunity to go in the transfer portal and do anything. Like, the transfer portal basically ends like the week after the College World Series is over. You give kids a week. And sometimes, I mean, coaches, there's obviously exceptions, but say a coach leaves, right? Like, you have such a small window, to kind of figure out if you want to sign for a team in the MLB draft. Your agents talking to people, your coaches are trying to get in order and get players back, and it's all weird. That calendar needs to be fixed. But the college football one is very brutal. I want to bring up Josh Heupel now, and he was asked a lot about Oklahoma, right? Because he was, former quarterback at Oklahoma. He was on staff there for a while, so with Brent Venables. So I do think I'd be remiss if I didn't bring some of that up, but I also would rather bring up some of this other stuff that he talked about. Like, because one thing I want to highlight is basically lots of teams bring their quarterbacks to their media days, right? Because they want them to be a leader or are leaders in their programs. But he was asked, hey, why didn't you bring Nico out here? Right. And Josh Heupel it's not about Nico, right? It's about these three guys that I brought. And he's talking more about Nico. Hey, he wanted to earn the respect of his teammates. He's at great urgency in his preparation all offseason. And I need fans of teams. I see this all the time. There was Texas A&M fans that were kind of panicking that Connor Wigman didn't go to SEC Media Days. Like, just because your quarterback does not go to SEC Media Days does not mean that he is a bad leader or has bad work ethic or bad setting bad example for people. Like, that does not mean any of that, right? Nico, for example, is just young. There's not a lot of sophomores out there. I mean, Torian York is a sophomore that's headed out there, but there's not a lot of them out there that are going to be at media days. Plus, I think every single person that Josh Heupel brought to SEC media days was a fifth or sixth year senior. So,
Mhm.
just veteran guys that have been through the program and have earned it, have earned the spotlight. So, I have no problem with the team not bringing a quarterback to SEC media days or Big 12 media days or whatever media day it is.
No, not at all. And to be honest, if I was like a lower tier program too, I'm not bringing my quarterback. It's similar to a spring game, almost paranoia, where it's like, or this, people don't want to play the spring game because if a player pops off, um, boom, like they can be plucked out of the portal or whatnot. I had the paranoia. I don't. To me, it doesn't matter who goes media days. I think it's a great, tremendous honor. It's not about your quarterback and your best player on defense. It should be leaders, like you said, old guys that have been there, done that, have earned that. And yeah, it doesn't make me reconsider how I feel about Tennessee or Nico at all. Wigman in the same sense as well. I think it's just a little bit blown out of proportion. I get that you have to ask it, but I don't think there's much behind it.
Absolutely. I want to talk about Brian Kelly. So he was asked, about what it how important it is, to play more balanced this season. And his answer to this was, kind of funny, but also true. He said, clearly being the number one offense in the country was not good enough. I think you have to have much more balance. So I think the balance that we need is offensively and defensively. We've got to be able to complement each other, and we didn't do that last year. So, I mean, this offense still should be pretty good for LSU, not to spoil it for our conference previews that are coming out pretty soon, but it should still be pretty good. The defense is kind of a concern, but they did bring in that new coaching staff, and he was asked several times about his new coaching staff and about Blake Baker, and he really believes in Blake Baker and the rest of the defensive staff there. I mean, he's paying Blake Baker $2.5 million more than any other assistant coach in college football, so you'd have to hope, right, that they're going to do something. So, but does that mean that it's immediately going to translate, you think, into do you think this defense can be much more improved just by getting a new coaching staff in there?
I mean, it to me it tells you a little bit about how they feel about this staff or felt about staff in terms of the lack of high level players they brought in the portal. In the defensive backfield, right? I thought they would have a pretty high need and a pretty high urgency level, and obviously it's LSU, the ability to go out and land some high level talent. And yes, you got a guy like Jordan Gilbert who's got nice experience at A&M. You're getting Jair Brown, an Ohio State kid. But other than that, I mean, they must feel pretty good about the talent on their team, and they've recruited well, right? You look at their backfield. Sage Ryan's a former five-star kid, a couple true sophomores, um, and Tovano, and Stamps as well back there in that cornerback position. So we'll see. I don't know how immediate it's going to be. I'm definitely cautious. I don't know about cautiously optimistic, but I feel a little bit better than um, I thought I was going to as this offseason's kind of gone on. The more I think about it and the talent that's there and the way that they were able to maximize Missouri's defense, right? And we'll see what happens, obviously, but I don't think it's going to be. I'm not expecting an overnight transition, and I'm not going to change my opinion on Blake Baker based on this year's performance, whether it be on one end or the other. But if it's somewhere in the middle, about a little bit better in defense and not elite, then I still see it's a step in the right direction for that program.
Yeah, I want to talk about Drink right now as well. So he talked about, of course, you have Baker go from Missouri to LSU. So he was asked, quote, Coach, I'm curious about what Corey Batoon, the new defense coordinator there, is going to bring to this defense. The way it'll look similar, a little bit different than the units that Blake Baker put together. But how do you see that side of the ball shaping up? And what does Corey Batoon bring from an attitude and X's and O's perspective? And Drink's response was, yeah, Death Row is the University of Missouri's defensive coordinator. It's had different leaders throughout its time, but that's uniquely us, which, I thought was interesting to say. But obviously, Coach Batoon has come in and installed the defense and the basic DNA of what it's been. But obviously, each, to me, play callers are different type of artists, and each artist paints its own picture. So kind of a bit of a nothing response there. I don't really know what I expected him to say, right? Um,
Yeah.
I mean, it sounds like he's confident, right, in Coach Batoon. Um, I'm not sure if he's able to comment on the mega differences between their defensive styles and what they're gonna bring as from a play calling perspective. But I did think it was funny that he mentioned the turnover at that defensive coordinator position through his time. So I thought that was
That
pretty
was. I
funny.
like Drink. Drink's got a good personality, and obviously that comes to light in a setting like this. But yeah, Batoon's interesting. I mean, he comes from South Alabama. Comes probably under that Kane Womack tree, who's going to be at Alabama, so there'll be a familiar South Alabama tint defensively in the SEC. Yeah, I don't know how much I read into that. I would if I was him, I was not expecting him to talk about the differences schematically between the two, and I think it's more of a let's wait and see type. And I wonder if it'll be Batoon kind of molding, his coaching style to the the strength and weaknesses they have on their team, or is it going to be, we're going to have this scheme and you guys going to make it work? What depending on, I guess we'll see.
So then Kalen DeBoer brings up, he was asked basically along the lines how does he feel about the roster of this team? And he says, we have a lot of work ahead. And when it comes to our team, we had a great spring. We were able to retain pretty much our entire roster. We did lose two guys to the portal. So begs the question, who were those two guys? Was it just two guys that they really lost? Because I mean they lost the guys I can think of off the top of my head, right? They lost Des Ricks. They lost of course Caleb Downs. They lost Isaiah Bond. they lost the tight end. What's his name? Help me out here.
To Texas. Yeah.
Tapri or
No, not CJ Dupree. It's dang it, he's a good player. That's gonna bother me. It'll come. It'll come. But
either
they also
way.
lost Julian Sayin too, right there.
Yep.
Amari
So
Niblack. Amari
oh
Niblack.
no, Amari not good pull, good pull. But so it's just funny. I just thought it was weird that he said we did lose two guys to the portal. Like, why did he have to specifically just mention just two
I
players?
I think that the two players, it's probably Bond
Bond
and
and Caleb
Caleb
Downs.
Downs because everyone else they kind of replaced pretty well. I mean, yeah, you lose Seth McLaughlin to Ohio State and James Brockmeyer to TCU as well, but you bring in your guy Parker Brailsford from Washington. Proctor comes back in the portal. You've got obviously plenty of depth at the quarterback position. Yeah, you have running back depth
Jermaine.
as well. I don't know. I think it's interesting.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's very interesting to hear Kalen DeBoer. It sounds like he's. I mean, I'm confident in this roster they just put together, right? But it sounds like he's not worried about. I mean, I'm not worried about. I'm not super worried about depth in a lot of their positions, but it seems like he's not worried at all about some of these players that he lost. Which as a coach, you're obviously not going to express that you are worried about those losses, right, to your fans, to your players, to your coaching staff, but um just felt like he kind of dismissed them a little bit. Uh, I don't know. I thought it was very interesting. I thought it was very interesting.
Was he talking
But
about the spring portal or is he talking about the the whole portal in general?
uh, maybe he was just talking about the spring portal. That's very possible. Because they just lose two guys in the spring portal.
I mean, you lost James Brockmeyer, right? He went to um
TCU.
TCU, and then Curtis Perry went to Virginia Tech in that second window. I think that's kind of it. So I wonder if that was it. But
Possible that he's just talking about those two guys then.
well, I guess if you count Buckner,
Oh yeah,
uh,
you could count Tyler Buckner, but okay.
yeah,
Well, I mean, if that's the case, then then I guess that makes complete sense. So it's a good point that you make up or you bring up there. So context matters, guys. Context matters. So, anyways, let's talk about Jeff Lebby a little bit. It was actually interesting. Like when I went back and watched his press conference, um, he did not talk very long on some of his answers. I think he just couldn't wait to get off the podium. I do like him there. Like he feels like he fits the bill kind of at Mississippi State. Um, but yeah, I did want to just reiterate earlier when we talked about helmet communications. Um, he was asked about, his top 10 tempo and what it would mean with helmet communications. And he said that we'll never be any different than what we have been. We get to dictate the game when we have the football. So it sounds like he's not so worried about it at all, which is, good to see. I was, when Greg Sankey brought that up, I was like, man, I hope they ask, some of these coaches about like what that's going to have on impact in terms of like the tempo of the game. But it sounds like if Jeff Lebby's not worried about the tempo of the game, then I'm not worried about the tempo of the game for the rest of college football.
yeah, no, you feel pretty good about that. And now it's also probably a little bit of coach speak, here and there, but
That's true.
regardless, I mean, I guess that's good. I mean, they got Shapen coming in, so he's a guy that's used to the Big 12 and what they did at Baylor. So we'll see how it translates to Levy's offense. It sounds like it's been a good transition so far. Um, but it'll be interesting to hear from or to see, come this fall.
Billy Napier was asked, "Hey, the whole nation is looking at the state of Florida in terms of recruiting. What will you be doing to keep those kids home?" Right, which is a fantastic question because
Yeah.
like he needs to start keeping those kids home, and he says that's a great question. I do think our philosophy to take an inside out approach in recruiting. I think it's critical that you start at home base and work your way out. The state of Florida has 275 Division One football players each year on average, right? Which is wild.
Jeez.
He's like, I think that's a 5-year sample. It's critical that we have a great evaluation process. I can't compliment our personal development enough in their approach. Um, yeah, I guess he didn't really say how he was going to improve that his situation there and keeping kids home. I think it's a simple answer: win football games, right?
Yeah.
Figure out NIL. I mean, that's how you get kids in the state of Florida to come to you. And beating UCF when they come to the Swamp this year is going to be a big deal. Beating Miami, beating Florida
Yep.
State this year. Like this year is a huge that is going to have a big impact because players are going to be at those games. So I think Billy Napier, I feel like I don't know how to answer that question really appropriately, right? It's kind of a tough question to answer as a head coach. Like, why aren't you keeping his kids home in state, And, he probably could be like, bro, we're trying, dog. Like, obviously we're trying. Uh, yeah, I mean, I think that the real answer to that is just win football games.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, and they had a nice class in 2024. It didn't quite finish the way they wanted to, but they did keep obviously McCray and Lagway, which were their two gems at their class. But in 2024, I mean, looking at the top recruits in the state of Florida, like you're not going to keep everyone, right? Especially when Miami has to act together recruiting wise. Florida State's starting to get better. UCF's in there as well, but also programs like Ohio State, Georgia, Bama, Clemson, they're going to have their hands, obviously in their state of in the state of Florida. But I've been looking in the transfer portal too in terms of attracting talent back home on guys that you either missed in that first cycle in their recruiting cycle or guys that you just didn't recruit in that first cycle and that want to come back home. I mean, none quicker than like a guy like Jameer Grimsley, who was committed to Alabama, and Nick Saban in this 2024 class. Obviously, Saban retires, things change for him. He decides to come transfer over to Florida, and they add him basically to their 2024 class. And to me, like not only do I think it's high school, it makes sense too, but in terms of returning guys home that either slipped through the cracks of Power Four or you just lost the first time out, and you can still keep that good relationship and continue to strengthen your roster overall talent wise with kids from the state of Florida.
Absolutely. The last coach I want to bring up is Mike Elko. Look, if we didn't get to your coach, sorry. Maybe you got a quote for us that you'd like us to go over. You can leave that guy in the mailbag, in our email at the Redshirt Sophomore gmail.com, right? Or DM us on Twitter at the Redshirt Soph. If you got a question or a quote that you might want us to talk about from your particular team at their media day, right? But Mike Elko, I want to talk about two things. I want to talk about one really big quote that he said that I think is uh, really big for A&M fans was he said, it is time to stop talking about what we are capable of as a program, right? I think that's a big deal because there's a lot of talk all the time about, A&M being a team that has the resources, has the fan base and the culture, the facilities, the geography. They have everything that they need to be successful, and they have not been living up to that standard. And I think sounds like Mike Elko is very well aware of the expectations here and the resources. I mean, obviously, he left another head coaching job to take this job. And I think he understands the tools that he has at his disposal, is what I really think that quote boils down to. And I think he's got a real shot to make these tools into something.
Yeah, I mean, I think Shamar Turner said something along those lines too about, what's the difference between this offseason and last offseason is last offseason, there's a lot of talking. This offseason, a lot more working, which obviously
Yeah.
speaks to, the all business approach we love in Mike Gelko, a little
I mean,
bit
that's a guy who
stylistically
gained
differently.
that's a guy who gained 30 pounds this offseason. He's
And
moving on the
looks
interior.
fantastic. Holy
Dude, did you
cow.
see him in that suit?
It's 300 pounds. That is crazy.
He looked like, I don't know, 240. Like he
Yeah,
looked lean. If that guy is 300 pounds, then oh my gosh,
I,
that is insane.
I do want to find it interesting. I know we were talking about Mike Elko, but in terms of um, Shamar Turner being there. I think it's interesting. That one caught my eye when I saw him going there because if you remember last season, he had a little bit of, he had that one, he got suspended from a game, right? For kicking a player or stomping on someone, right?
Punching
Was
someone's
that Ole Miss?
balls.
Okay, that's actually awesome. This
There's
guy,
a crazy picture of there out there. It's like
maybe he'll
it's
fit
like
right in.
it's like pass it back eggs. It's
That
awesome.
is fantastic. But
I mean,
I find it
obviously,
interesting to
yeah,
see how quickly. I mean, obviously, Elko knows him from his previous stop, right?
yeah.
Recruiting
He's
him, but
probably like he mentioned it before, like that. Shamar Turner's probably the guy on that team that he's known for the longest period of time. So I'm
which
not
is nice.
surprised.
Yeah, but it's cool to see. Obviously he lost his cool. Doesn't define him as a player at all. But we talk about like, well, when Nico didn't get invited, and we're talking about who gets invited. To me, I found it interesting. I figured there was a connection back when he was his first stop at A&M, but and obviously he's a tremendous player and he's going to be a big asset for that D line this year. Even though he might not even be the best player on that defensive line, which is crazy. But he's that kid. That was just cool. That was cool.
Yeah. And then the last thing I wanted to bring up, which is Mike. It was a question that was asked by Mike Elko, but it also includes Texas as well, right? And first of all, I find it so crazy that some of these guys are professionals. Like the question previous to this one was, you know, what is the change in recruiting dynamic, adding Texas and Oklahoma into the SEC? And then the next question someone asked, again, a professional at his job, said, look, hey, Texas is moving to the SEC. Is that going to change recruiting? Like what? Like what are we doing? So sorry, like
That's the classic, like you're not paying attention in class, back in high school or whatever,
yeah.
and you ask the same question and then you just get buried.
Yeah, and so, but his point was, it's not just us in Texas, which I thought was, kind of crazy because I think a big part of whether A&M fans want to believe it or not, I like a huge factor in recruiting was, yeah, this is an SEC school and that school is not, right? It
Yeah.
there was and is a difference in those conferences, and so Mike Elko was asked, about like what that's going to look like, and he said, it's not just us in Texas, right? And then he went on to saying that, uh, Texas, Oklahoma, and A&M all hold a lot of weight in the state of Texas, and Mike Elko says that he doesn't believe it's going to affect it, even though it actually probably will, to a degree for sure.
Yeah.
Uh, but that's what that's what he has to say, right? He has to say that he doesn't believe it's going to change, that we're still going to recruit at a high level. Like, don't worry, he has to say that kind of thing. So, it is what it is. But I do think it is an interesting point brought up that the recruiting dynamic. I don't think the dynamic changes. The same players going to the same school. It just offers like one more kind of pitch that A&M might have had the edge over on those two schools before. That I guess they don't now, but they have just as good facilities. I mean, honestly, like better culture than Texas. Oklahoma has a great football culture, so I'm not gonna question their culture over there. It just, I mean, fan culture. I mean, so I think, again, it just speaks to the resources that he has and the tools and what he could potentially do for this Texas A&M team. So, but yeah,
Yeah.
that's all we got for SEC Media Days today. Did you have any last points that you wanted to bring up, Christopher, that you saw, maybe some nuggets at SEC Media Days?
Well, I wanted to piggyback recruiting pitch, or the recruiting part from Elko. First of all, they're recruiting damn well this summer. They have crushed it recently. They're up to seventh overall. They got 19 commits. Obviously, the headliner is Husan Longstreet, stud cornerback. Not only are they doing well in the state of Texas, they're also crushing California. They've got what, three players in the top five, four players in the top 10, which is impressive. I do think they're like we talked about Billy Napier staying with Florida, like it's about winning games. And like Texas A&M's always had nice things about its program, and I do think they could recruit even better once they do start. I think to win more consistently under Elko than they did back in the previous regime. Uh, and yeah, and the buy-in is all in right there, so you're not worried about that. But obviously, like the state of Texas too, especially like in 2020s and beyond, like football recruiting has also become pretty national. Where I mean, you're looking at the top players in the top committed players in the state of Texas, and you have like four schools that have guys committed to them before you get to Texas and Texas A&M. And if you're going off of the 24/7 rankings, right, you've got Ohio State, Oregon, Alabama's got a couple. SMU right there in
Yeah,
in
unbelievable.
Dallas, which is awesome. And they actually had two kids. They had Keelan Russell come in for a little bit, but now
Mhm.
he's over at Alabama. Uh, but Oregon and Ohio State, they're having success down there as well as DeBoer in Alabama. So it's just interesting. I think it's if you're Texas and Alabama, you're also fending off these high level programs as well, not just each other.
Absolutely. Well, that'll wrap it up for SEC Media Days recap. Let us know in the comments other stuff that y'all heard that you thought was interesting. Um, what you guys think about, some of the quotes that we said. What are your interpretations? But yeah, I mean, we're here. We got ACC and Big Ten Media Days next week. We'll do that, and yeah, y'all are gonna get our conference previews out. And look, we're hyping them up, but it's because they're the real deal. All right, it is your one stop shop for everything, for eh, every Power Four conference. It is your one stop shop.
Yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed. I hope you guys enjoyed this. Obviously, like and subscribe. Like Matthews always says, what if you like the content, like the video? It really helps our channel grow, as well as subscribing. Send the video, share it to other people. That continues to help us with our journey to increasing our channel. And obviously, once we get into football season, we'll still be pumping out a lot of content as well. So you're gonna want to stick around for the season as well.
Alrighty, and we'll see y'all in the next one.